The Newsday continues here on One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. The Foreign Affairs Department announces the fourth Filipino casualty in the Israel-Hamas war. In a tweet, DFA Secretary Enrique Manalo said the fourth fatality was confirmed to them by the Israeli government. He says that out of respect for the wishes of the family, the agency will be withholding details on the victim's identity. Manalo notes, though, that they have assured the family of the government's full support and assistance. President Bongbong Marcos urged the public not to cast negative judgment on the Maharlika Fund in light of the suspension of its implementation. Marcos Jr. says he's just looking into how the investment fund could be improved. He also earlier denied that the suspension has anything to do with the concerns of Land Bank and DBP falling short of their capital requirements after funding Maharlika.
The concept of the Maharlika Fund as a sovereign fund or an investment fund, the concept remains a good one. And we are still committed to having it operational before the end of the year. So we should not misinterpret what we have done as somehow a judgment on the rightness or wrongness of the Maharlika Fund. On the contrary, we are just finding ways to make it as close to perfect and ideal as possible.
The president is leaving for Saudi today, where he was supposed to promote the Maharlika Fund at the ASEAN Gulf Cooperation Council Summit. But despite the fund being in the back burner for now, Marcos says the country's attendance in the summit remains indispensable.
This is the first interaction between ASEAN and the GCC, both of whom are very vibrant regions in terms of economic development for the globe. And that is why the Philippines needs to be part of that discussion. This summit will serve as an important platform for the Philippines to highlight the need for cooperation in energy and food security, logistics, supply chains, digital information, the free flow of goods, people, and services, as well as the enhancement and protection of the rights, of course, of our overseas workers.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is still clueless as to why Malacanang decided to suspend the implementation of the Maharlika Investment Fund. BSP Governor Eli Remolona told reporters that he was never included in any discussion that led to the decision. The BSP is one of the funding sources for Maharlika, together with Land Bank and the Development Bank of the Philippines. Asked on whether the remitted funds will be returned while the MIF is on hold, Remolona said contributions made to the fund will remain. He said, quote, "As far as I know, it is a suspension of the IRR and not a cancellation of the fund." Meanwhile, a former central banker believes the remitted funds to the MIF should be returned. Speaking to the big story, former BSP Deputy Governor Diwa Ginigundo said returning the 75 billion pesos in combined remittance to the Land Bank and DBP will allow them to replenish their capital. Both government banks sought regulatory relief after transferring their share of the seed money to the Maharlika Fund.
Their capital base was reduced by so much. And at the same time, their capital adequacy ratio will also be affected in the process. So that would constrain them from either accelerating their lending or at least sustaining the pace of lending that they've been used to do in the past period.
Ginigundo also flagged fiscal sustainability issues concerning the funding for MIF. Malacanang earlier exempted Land Bank from remitting dividends to the national government shortly after its contribution to the Maharlika Fund. Ginigundo said it's possible for the DBP to seek the same exemption, leaving government with reduced revenues.
The government will be constrained. It will be forced to seek some other ways to fund the difference. Either it imposes higher taxes or increase its borrowing to be able to compensate for the lost dividends coming from the two GFIs and also from the BSP itself.
We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. Vice President Sara Duterte says now is not the time for politicking. In a video message, the Vice President thanks supporters for backing her push for confidential funds for both the OVP and the Education Department, which she heads. Her message comes after the House stripped both offices of a combined 650 million pesos worth of confidential funds. The Vice President called to set aside politics as the presidential polls won't be for another few years. VP Sara also says politicking is a minor issue compared to the state of the economy, which faces risks from the wars between Israel and Hamas, as well as Russia and Ukraine.
May oras para sa lahat at hindi ito ang panahon ng paninira at pamumulitika, lalo na malayo pa ang susunod na halalan para sa pagkapangulo. Sa mga oras ng kagipitan, magmasid at magkilala kung sino ang tunay na mga kaibigan na nasa inyong tabi. Lahat ng bagay sa mundo ay may kanya-kanyang panahon.
The Vice President also advises her supporters to brace themselves for difficult times ahead amid the continued rise in prices of goods.
Hinihikayat ko ang bawat isa sa inyo na tutukan ang paghahanda sa darating na panahon ng taghirap, lalo na sa patuloy na pagtaas ng presyo ng pagkain at iba pang bilihin. Higit na mahalaga ang ating pagkakaisa, pagtutulungan at pagiging handa para tiyakin ang ating mga pamilya ay ligtas at matatag sa darating na mga buwan.
Defense Secretary Gibo Teodoro hits back on China, calling them the real illegal occupants in the West Philippine Sea. This is after the Chinese government justified its Navy's act of hounding another Philippine vessel in the West Philippine Sea last week. Recall that the BRP Benguet was ferrying supplies to Pag-asa Island on October 13 when a Chinese Navy vessel attempted to block its path and cross its bow. The Chinese Foreign Ministry called this, quote, a lawful and legitimate move against the Philippines, which they said was occupying Pag-asa Island illegally. This was Teodoro's response.
Ayoko naman matawa dahil bastos naman. Pero itanong mo sa kanila kung ano ibig nila sabihin. Sasabihin nila siguro indisputable sovereignty ng South China Sea. Ilan na naniniwala doon? Ang illegal occupation ay kanila. Pag inoccupy ng Pilipinas ang Hainan Island, yun, illegal occupation yun. Pero yun, nandito sila within our 200-mile exclusive economic zone. Sila ang squatter, illegal occupant sila dito.
Today marks the beginning of a 10-day campaign period for the barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections. As soon as the clock struck 12, supporters of different candidates in Manila have begun putting up campaign materials in their barangays. They made sure to follow campaign rules such as asking for permission before posting campaign materials in private properties. Some supporters even came up with a campaign jingle for their supported candidates. They played their jingle while putting up tarpaulins at designated common poster areas. Candidates and their supporters are making sure that the posters and tarps they post are within the required sizes of the COMELEC. In Quezon City, this group made sure to post their campaign materials at a common poster area, the only one designated by the COMELEC in their barangay. Among the designated posting areas are plazas, public markets, and barangay centers. Local police have also heightened security measures at checkpoints to prevent any illegal activities during the campaign period. Some candidates believe, though, that the 10-day campaign period is not enough for residents to woo voters, but they note that they are still happy to have been given a chance to be heard by the residents. Meanwhile, 200 candidates for the upcoming barangay and SK elections are welcoming the official campaign period with disqualification cases filed against them. 7,000 candidates have been given show cause orders, while 200 election hopefuls are facing disqualification for premature campaigning. COMELEC Chairman George Garcia said that disqualification cases will be resolved by October 30. He adds that COMELEC's task force will continue to watch out for election violations. as the official campaign period kicks off today. Garcia also reminded candidates and voters to respect the country's election and campaigning rules.
Alam niyo po, sa pagsunod pong yan, mapapakita natin ang kahandaan natin na maging leader ng ating barangay. Sa pagsunod at pagtalima, pinapatunayan natin na meron tayong moral ascendancy doon sa mga makakapalang mukha at doon sa mga medyo mga pasaway at mga epal. Doon naman po sa ating mga butante, ito po yung tamang panahon na makapamili tayo ng mga leader ng ating barangay. Ganyan po ka-importante ang barangay natin sapagkat sila po ang frontliners natin sa lahat ng ating problema.
And those are the top stories of the hour. Join us again at 11:15 a.m. as we continue to monitor the day's biggest stories. I'm Diego Castro. We are One News. All sides, all the time.